Look at this photograph from July 17, 1981. The grand atrium of the Hyatt Regency Kansas City, a stunning four-story lobby filled with elegant walkways, soaring glass windows, and more than 1,000 people dressed in their finest, gathering for the hotel's popular Friday evening tea dance. Live music fills the air. People are laughing, dancing, meeting friends, enjoying cocktails. It's 7 p.m. on a warm summer evening, and the hotel is alive with energy and celebration. On the walkways suspended high above the lobby floor, guests lean against the railings, looking down at the dancers below, enjoying the bird's-eye view of the festivities. The second-floor walkway, the third-floor walkway, the fourth-floor walkway. 3 elegant skywalks, spanning the length of the atrium, connected to the building by slender steel hanger rods, appearing to float in mid-air like architectural poetry. However, within 5 minutes, 2 of these walkways will collapse without warning and fall onto the densely packed crowd below. 114 people will be dead. 216 more will be injured. It will be the deadliest structural collapse in American history, a record that will stand for exactly 20 years until September 11, 2001. The haunting truth: this disaster was entirely preventable. It was caused by what seemed like a harmless engineering change, a simple modification that made construction easier, that appeared to make no significant difference to the design. A change so minor that it was approved with a phone call rather than revised drawings. A change that a first-year engineering student could have identified as catastrophically dangerous. But nobody checked. Multiple companies and contractors, all assuming someone else had verified the calculations. A rushed construction schedule, preliminary sketches used as final drawings, and a seemingly innocent decision that doubled the load on critical connection points, turning 3 beautiful walkways into ticking time bombs suspended over a crowd of unsuspecting people. This is the story of how poor communication, inadequate oversight, and one simple design change killed 114 people in 5 seconds. Before we begin, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. We love seeing our global audience and how this story reaches people around the world. The Hyatt Regency Kansas City is the crown jewel of the Crown Center complex, a massive development owned by Hallmark Cards, the greeting card company whose headquarters dominates this section of the city. The complex is ambitious: retail space, residential towers, office buildings, and at its center a spectacular 45-story luxury hotel with over 700 guest rooms. Construction moves quickly. Too quickly, some will later say. The hotel is completed in 1980, rising like a gleaming monolith of glass and steel, a monument to modern architecture and Kansas City's growing prominence as a destination city. The Hyatt Regency brand is synonymous with luxury and innovation, and this Kansas City location is designed to embody both. But the real showpiece isn't the rooms or the restaurants. It's the lobby. The atrium is breathtaking, a cavernous 4-story space filled with natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows. The design is open, airy, elegant. Metal, glass, and concrete combine to create a space that feels both grand and inviting. And spanning the length of this spectacular lobby, at the second, third, and fourth floors, are 3 walkways, skywalks that allow hotel guests to cross from one side of the building to the other while looking down at the lobby below. These walkways aren't just functional, they're architectural statements. They appear to float in mid-air, suspended by slender steel hanger rods that connect them to the ceiling structure above. The effect is dramatic, almost magical, solid walkways hanging in space with no visible pillars or supports beneath them. The walkways become a signature feature of the hotel. Guests love them. Photographers use them as backdrops. The hotel's marketing materials prominently feature images of the stunning multi-level atrium with its suspended skywalks. From the moment it opens, the Hyatt Regency Kansas City is a hit. The location is perfect, connected to the Crown Center complex, close to downtown, easily accessible. The facilities are first-rate. The rooms are modern and comfortable, and the lobby, with its spectacular walkways, becomes a destination in itself. But it's the tea dances that really put the hotel on the map. Every Friday and Saturday evening, the hotel hosts a tea dance in the grand lobby. It's a Kansas City phenomenon that grows more popular with each passing week. The concept is simple but appealing: live music, a cash bar, dancing, socializing, all in the stunning setting of the hotel's atrium. Entry is free, or very inexpensive, making it accessible to a broad audience. People come in droves: young professionals looking to unwind after the work week, couples on dates, groups of friends meeting for a night out, singles hoping to meet someone special. The tea dances quickly become the place to be on a Friday or Saturday night in Kansas City. The crowds grow larger week by week. By mid-1981, it's not unusual for more than 1,000 people to pack into the lobby for these events. The dance floor on the ground level becomes densely crowded with people moving to the music provided by a live band. The bar does brisk business, the energy is electric, and the walkways above provide the perfect vantage point. Hotel guests and tea dance attendees alike gather on the second and fourth floor skywalks, leaning against the railings, looking down at the spectacle below. You can see the entire lobby from up there, the dancers, the band, the flow of the crowd. It's like having a private box seat to the best show in town. The hotel staff encourages this. The walkways are left open during the tea dances. There are no restrictions on how many people can gather there. It's all part of the experience, part of what makes the Hyatt Regency Kansas City special. Nobody seems to worry about weight limits. Nobody questions whether the walkways were designed to hold dozens of people standing shoulder to shoulder along their length. The walkways are solidly built, suspended by heavy steel rods. They've been there since the hotel opened. They seem permanent, immovable, safe. Week after week, hundreds of people pack into the lobby. Week after week, dozens more gather on the walkways above. Week after week, the system holds. Until July 17, 1981, when it doesn't. It's a warm Friday evening. The tea dance is scheduled to begin at 7 p.m., but people start arriving earlier, securing good spots on the dance floor, claiming tables, ordering drinks. By 7 p.m., more than 1,000 people fill the hotel lobby. The crowd is perhaps larger than usual. The tea dances have become increasingly popular, and word has spread. This is the place to be. The atmosphere is festive, relaxed, people are dressed casually but nicely. This is Kansas City in the summer, so lightweight dresses, slacks, short-sleeved shirts. Friends greet each other with hugs and handshakes. The bartenders are busy. The band is setting up, preparing to start the first set. On the walkways above, people gather to watch. The second floor walkway has perhaps 20 or 30 people on it. The fourth floor walkway, which offers an even better view, has a similar number. Some are hotel guests who wandered out of their rooms to see what the commotion is about. Others are tea dance attendees who came upstairs specifically for the view. They lean against the railings, chat with friends, watch the crowd below fill in. At 7:05 p.m., the band begins to play. The first notes of music echo through the atrium. On the dance floor, couples start to move. The tea dance has officially begun. And then, without warning, people hear sounds that don't belong. Loud popping noises. Sharp cracks that cut through the music. Some people later describe it as sounding like gunshots. Others compare it to the snapping of large tree branches. The sounds are coming from above, from the connection points where the fourth floor walkways hanger rods attached to the support beams. The nuts holding the walkway in place are being pulled through the box beams they're secured against. The metal is failing. The connections are giving way. For a brief moment, perhaps 2 or 3 seconds, the fourth floor walkway hangs suspended, held in place by connections that are actively tearing through steel. And then it fails completely. The fourth floor walkway drops straight down. It falls approximately 25 feet and slams directly onto the second floor walkway, which is suspended about 20 feet below it. The impact is catastrophic. The second floor walkway, never designed to absorb such a load, fails instantly under the combined weight of 2 walkways plus all the people standing on both of them. The entire mass, 2 full-length walkways, tons of concrete, steel and glass, plus dozens of people crashes down onto the densely packed crowd on the lobby floor. The fall happens in seconds. People on the ground floor have no time to react, no time to run. One moment they're dancing, talking, laughing. The next moment, thousands of pounds of concrete and steel are falling on them from above. The sound is indescribable. The shriek of tearing metal. The explosive crack of concrete shattering. The crash of 2 massive structures hitting the marble floor. And then, almost immediately, the screams. The lobby transforms from a place of celebration to a scene of absolute carnage in the span of 5 seconds. Where there had been a dance floor filled with people, there is now a chaotic pile of wreckage. Concrete slabs, twisted steel beams, shattered glass everywhere. Bodies, some moving, some not. People trapped under debris. Blood on the white marble floor. Water beginning to flood the area as ruptured sprinkler pipes spray hundreds of gallons across the ruined lobby. Those who were standing away from the direct impact zone, near the walls by the entrance at the bar, are initially stunned into immobility. What just happened? Did the ceiling collapse? Was it a bomb, an earthquake? The scene is so chaotic, so impossible, that the mind struggles to process it. And then the screams register. The calls for help, the sight of people trapped in the wreckage, and the realization hits the walkways fell. The walkways that had been suspended safely above the lobby for a year, that thousands of people had walked across or stood beneath, have collapsed onto the crowd below. The survivors nearest the wreckage begin trying to help. They pull at concrete chunks, try to lift steel beams, reach toward trapped victims. But the debris is too heavy. Individual people can't move the massive pieces of walkway. They need equipment. They need help. They need it now. Someone has already called 911. Within minutes, emergency services begin to arrive. But when the first responders enter the lobby and see the scale of the disaster, they realize immediately that this is beyond anything they've prepared for. The Kansas City Fire Department arrives within minutes of the collapse. Paramedics, police. But as they enter the lobby and survey the scene, the enormity of the challenge becomes clear. This isn't a typical building collapse, where debris can be cleared piece by piece. This is tons of reinforced concrete and steel beams piled in a tangled mass, with victims trapped throughout. The equipment the fire department has on hand, hydraulic spreaders, airbags, hand tools, is inadequate for moving the largest pieces of debris. They can pull away smaller chunks, can reach some of the victims who are trapped near the edges of the pile. But the people buried deeper in the wreckage, pinned under massive concrete slabs, or trapped beneath steel beams, are inaccessible. And there's another problem. Water. The building's sprinkler system has been damaged in the collapse. Pipes have ruptured, and water is flooding the lobby at an alarming rate. Victims who survived the initial impact, who are trapped but alive in air pockets within the wreckage, are now at risk of drowning as water levels rise around them. Fire chiefs make an urgent appeal to Kansas City's construction community. They need heavy equipment, cranes, jackhammers, cutting torches, anything that can move or break through the massive concrete sections, and the construction companies respond immediately. Within an hour, heavy machinery begins arriving at the hotel. Crane operators, demolition experts, construction workers, they drop everything and rush to the scene, bringing their equipment with them. The rescue operation becomes a massive coordinated effort. Firefighters, paramedics, police, construction workers, volunteers, hundreds of people working together to reach the trapped victims. But it's brutal, dangerous work conducted under the worst possible conditions. The power has failed in parts of the building, leaving large sections of the lobby in darkness. Portable lights are brought in, but visibility remains poor. Dust hangs in the air. Water is everywhere, making footing treacherous and equipment operation difficult, and the emotional toll is crushing. Rescuers can hear people trapped in the wreckage, screaming for help, crying in pain, calling out names of loved ones, and in many cases there's nothing the rescuers can do immediately. The debris pinning these people down is too heavy or too precariously balanced to move quickly. Rushing could cause further collapse, could kill the very people they're trying to save. So they have to work carefully, methodically, even as they listen to people suffering just feet away. In some cases, the only way to reach survivors is by removing the bodies of those who didn't make it. The dead are blocking access to the living. Rescuers have to make impossible choices, dismember the deceased to create a path, or leave the living trapped. They do what they have to do. In the darkness, in the water, surrounded by the screams of the injured, they cut through whatever stands between them and the survivors. It's work that will haunt many of them for the rest of their lives, and in a few terrible cases, the only way to save someone is to amputate. A victim trapped beneath a concrete slab, legs crushed beyond repair, bleeding out. If they're not freed in the next few minutes, they'll die. But the debris can't be moved. The only option is amputation on site. No anesthesia, no operating room, just a rescuer with medical training and a saw, doing what has to be done to save a life. Among those trying desperately to help is a local football star who had been attending the tea dance. In interviews later, he describes the helplessness he felt. Here was a man known for his physical strength, an athlete in peak condition, and he couldn't do anything. The debris was too heavy, the concrete slabs too massive, He tried to lift beams that wouldn't budge. He pulled at wreckage that might as well have been welded in place, and all around him, people were screaming for help. People he could see, could reach out and touch, but couldn't save because the weight pinning them down was beyond his strength or any individual's strength. He stood there, this powerful man, feeling utterly powerless as people died feet away from him. The psychological impact of that helplessness, that proximity to suffering he couldn't alleviate, would stay with him forever. This is the reality of structural collapse disasters. The victims aren't swept away or vaporized. They're right there, visible, calling for help, and rescuers have to work knowing that for every person they save, there are others they can't reach in time. The rescue operation continues through the night and into the next day. Slowly, painstakingly, victims are pulled from the wreckage. Some are alive, many are not. The bodies of the dead are moved to a makeshift morgue set up in the hotel's exhibition area. The injured are transported to nearly every hospital in the Kansas City area. There are simply too many casualties for any single facility to handle. The final toll is devastating. 114 people dead, 216 injured, many critically. In a city the size of Kansas City, this means almost everyone knows at least one victim. The psychic impact on the community is enormous. This wasn't a natural disaster or an act of violence. This was a building failure. A place that should have been safe, a luxury hotel, just a year old, built to modern standards, had killed more than 100 people. The question on everyone's mind: how did this happen? Investigators descend on the scene within hours. The National Bureau of Standards, structural engineers, forensic specialists, they begin carefully documenting the wreckage, photographing every detail, taking measurements, collecting samples, and fairly quickly, their focus narrows to the connection points where the walkway hanger rods had been attached to the support beams. The physical evidence is clear. The nuts that secured the fourth-floor walkway had pulled completely through the box beams they were fastened against. The metal had torn like paper under the load. But this raises an obvious question: if the design was so flawed, how did it ever get approved? How did a major hotel, built by reputable companies, end up with walkways that would fail under normal loading conditions? The answer lies in the construction drawings, and what investigators discover is shocking. To understand what went wrong, you need to understand how the walkways were supposed to be built versus how they were actually built. The difference seems minor, but the engineering implications are enormous. Here's a metaphor that helps explain the scope of this mistake. Imagine you and a friend are hanging from a rope suspended from the ceiling. You're holding a knot halfway up the rope, and your friend is holding a knot below you. In this configuration, the rope bears all the weight. You're only holding your own body weight, and your friend is only holding their own body weight. The rope itself connects to the ceiling and supports both of you. Now imagine replacing that single rope with two separate ropes. You're holding onto a rope attached to the ceiling. Your friend is holding onto a different rope, one that's attached to you, not to the ceiling. Your friend is in the same position as before, hanging from a rope, but you're now holding both your own weight and your friend's weight. The rope you're holding connects to the ceiling, but it also has to support your friend's rope hanging from you. Your friend's load hasn't changed, but your load has doubled. You're now holding twice as much weight as you were before. The connection point where you're holding the rope, your hands, in this metaphor, is now under twice as much stress. This is essentially what happened with the Hyatt Regency walkways. And the truly terrifying part is that it was done deliberately, as a simplification of the original design. In the original plans, the second floor and fourth floor walkways were suspended by long continuous hanger rods. These rods ran from the ceiling structure all the way down, passing through the fourth floor walkway and continuing down to support the second floor walkway below. Each rod was a single continuous piece of steel, threaded along its entire length. In this design, each rod supported both walkways, but the connection points on the fourth floor walkway only had to bear the weight of the fourth floor walkway itself. The second floor walkway's weight was borne by the rod continuing past the fourth floor up to the ceiling. The fourth floor beams weren't holding up the second floor, the ceiling was holding up both floors through continuous rods. But during construction, the steel fabricator proposed a change. Threading long continuous rods along their entire length would be difficult and time-consuming. The rods could easily be damaged during handling and installation. It would be much simpler, they suggested, to use two shorter rods instead of one long rod. Upper rods would run from the ceiling down to the fourth floor. Lower rods would run from the fourth floor down to the second floor. It looked the same, it functioned the same, or so they thought, and it would be much easier to manufacture and install. The engineering firm approved the change, not with revised drawings and new calculations, not with a formal design review, with a phone call, a quick conversation. Yeah, that sounds fine. 2 rods instead of 1, no problem. But it wasn't fine, it was catastrophically wrong. Because in this new configuration, the connection points on the 4th floor walkway now had to bear the weight of both the 4th floor walkway and the entire 2nd floor walkway hanging below it. The load had doubled, and nobody had calculated whether the connection points could handle it. Think back to that rope metaphor. When you're holding both your weight and your friend's weight, the stress on your hands, the connection point has doubled. In engineering terms, the box beams where the hanger rods connected to the 4th floor walkway were now bearing twice the load they had been designed to carry. The original design called for connection points to support approximately 31,000 pounds. The modified design, with 2 rods instead of 1 continuous rod, subjected those same connection points to approximately 62,000 pounds, double the load. And here's the most damning detail. According to the original structural engineer, this was such an obvious problem that a first-year engineering student could have spotted it. This wasn't subtle. This wasn't a complex interaction of forces that required advanced computer modeling to detect. This was basic statics, fundamental load calculations, the kind of problem that appears in introductory engineering textbooks. If anyone had actually run the numbers, if anyone had sat down with a calculator and calculated the forces acting on those connection points, the problem would have been immediately obvious. The modified design was unsafe, catastrophically unsafe. It should never have been built. But nobody ran the numbers. The steel fabricator proposed the change to make their work easier. The engineering firm approved it with a phone call, assuming the fabricator had done the calculations. The fabricator assumed the engineering firm had verified the change was acceptable. The construction company assumed both the fabricator and the engineers had done their jobs. Everyone assumed someone else had checked. And so the hotel was built with walkways that were structurally unsound from the day they were installed. For a full year those walkways held. Week after week, tea dance after tea dance, they supported the weight of people gathering on them. But the connection points were overstressed, and with each loading cycle, with each event that put weight on the walkways, microscopic damage accumulated. The nuts were slowly working their way through the box beams. The metal was fatiguing. On July 17, 1981, with perhaps 40 to 60 people distributed across the 2nd and 4th floor walkways, plus the vibration from the music and dancing below, the connection points finally failed. The nuts pulled through the beams. The walkway dropped, and 114 people died. As investigators dug deeper into the construction of the hotel, they uncovered a litany of failures that went far beyond the walkway design change. The Hyatt Regency Kansas City had been built in a rush, and corners had been cut throughout the process. Preliminary sketches were used as final drawings. In proper construction protocol, designs go through multiple stages: conceptual drawings, preliminary plans, detailed engineering drawings, and finally stamped, approved construction documents. At the Hyatt Regency, preliminary sketches that should have been just early-stage concepts were being used by contractors as if they were final approved plans. Nobody bothered to produce proper final drawings for many elements of the construction. Design changes were approved by phone call rather than revised plans. The hanger rod modification wasn't unique. Throughout the construction process, changes were made to the design based on quick phone conversations. A contractor would call the engineering firm, "Hey, we want to do this slightly differently, is that okay?" The engineer would say, "Yeah, sure, sounds fine," without actually reviewing calculations or producing revised drawings. These verbal approvals bypassed the entire review and verification process that exists specifically to catch dangerous errors. Nobody verified anyone else's work. The engineering firm assumed the steel fabricator had verified the hanger rod change would work. The steel fabricator assumed the engineering firm had approved it because they'd done the calculations. The general contractor assumed both parties had done their jobs. The construction company installing the walkways assumed the design they were working from was sound. At every stage, people assumed someone else had checked. Nobody actually checked. The construction schedule was rushed. The hotel was being built quickly to meet deadlines and start generating revenue. This pressure led to shortcuts, to approvals without proper review, to a general atmosphere of good enough rather than rigorous adherence to proper procedures. The investigation revealed that the Hyatt Regency Kansas City wasn't just a case of one bad design change. It was a systemic failure of the entire construction process. Poor communication, lack of oversight, assumptions rather than verification. A culture where getting things done quickly was prioritized over getting things done right. And the result was 114 deaths that should never have happened. The engineering firm Jack D. Gillam and Associates had been responsible for the original structural design of the hotel. They had produced the initial plans showing the long continuous hanger rods, and crucially they had approved the final construction drawings that showed the modified design with two shorter rods. That approval was the critical failure. The engineers were supposed to be the final safeguard, the professionals who verified that everything was structurally sound. They had stamped the drawings, certifying that the design was safe to build. And they had done so without actually calculating whether the modified hanger rod design could support the required loads. In the aftermath of the disaster, Jack D. Gillam and Associates lost their engineering licenses in 3 states. They were expelled from the American Society of Civil Engineers. Their reputation was destroyed. The firm that had designed prominent buildings across the region was now synonymous with one of the worst engineering failures in American history. But there were no criminal charges. Despite 114 deaths directly resulting from engineering negligence, nobody went to jail. The legal system treated this as a civil matter, a question of liability and compensation, not criminal culpability. More than 300 civil lawsuits were filed against everyone connected to the construction and operation of the hotel. The engineering firm, the steel fabricator, the general contractor, the hotel management, Hallmark Cards as the owner of the complex. The lawsuits dragged on for years, eventually resulting in billions of dollars in settlements and judgments. A large portion of this money, hundreds of millions of dollars, was set aside specifically for charitable causes to help the Kansas City community heal. Funds for victim support, mental health services, community rebuilding programs. The money couldn't bring back the dead or undo the trauma, but it at least acknowledged the scale of the damage done to the city. And through all of this, through all the lawsuits, all the settlements, all the money paid out, everyone connected with the case denied all legal responsibility. The engineering firm blamed the fabricator for proposing the change. The fabricator blamed the engineers for approving it without proper review. The contractors blamed the designers. The hotel blamed everyone involved in construction. Billions of dollars changed hands, but nobody would officially admit fault. This refusal to accept responsibility, this legal dance to avoid culpability even while paying massive settlements, infuriated many victims and their families. The message seemed clear: money was being paid not as an admission of wrongdoing but simply to make the problem go away. Jack D. Gillam, the senior engineer whose firm bore ultimate responsibility for the structural design, was haunted by the disaster for the rest of his life. Unlike his lawyers and corporate representatives who denied all responsibility in legal proceedings, Gillam personally acknowledged his failure. He knew what his firm had done wrong. He knew that his approval of those construction drawings had killed 114 people. He spent his remaining years traveling to universities and professional conferences, giving lectures about the Hyatt Regency collapse. He would stand in front of rooms full of engineering students and young professionals and tell them, in detail, about every mistake he and his firm had made. He explained the technical failure. He described the shortcuts taken. He recounted the assumptions that had proven fatal. And he would tell them, this can happen to you. If you get complacent, if you assume someone else has checked, if you approve something with a phone call rather than doing the calculations yourself, if you prioritize schedule over safety, if you let construction pressure override engineering judgment. Gillam wanted the story to scare young engineers. He wanted them to look at what happened at the Hyatt Regency and think, I never want to be responsible for something like that. I will check my work. I will not assume. I will not cut corners. I will ask questions even when it's inconvenient. It was a form of penance, this endless retelling of his greatest failure, but it was also arguably one of the most important contributions he could make in the disaster's aftermath. Because engineering disasters don't happen in isolation. They happen because of patterns of behavior, cultures of complacency, systems that allow errors to go unchecked, and the only way to prevent future disasters is to change those patterns, those cultures, those systems. Gillam couldn't bring back the 114 people who died. But he could try to prevent the 115th death, the one that would happen in some future disaster if engineers didn't learn from his mistakes. There's a bitter truth about safety regulations and engineering standards. They always seem to be learned at the expense of numerous lives. Nobody seems to care until a large body count is involved. Before the Hyatt Regency collapse, the issues that led to the disaster were well known to professionals in the field. Engineers understood the importance of proper load calculations. They knew that design changes needed to be verified. They knew that assumptions were dangerous, but these weren't universal standards rigorously enforced. They were best practices that good engineers followed, but that could be overlooked when schedules were tight and budgets were pressed. It took 114 deaths to change that. In the wake of the disaster, engineering curricula were completely overhauled worldwide. Not just in the United States, in countries around the globe. The Hyatt Regency collapse became international news, a cautionary tale that transcended national boundaries. Engineering programs added new emphases on professional responsibility, on the ethical obligations of engineers, on the life and death consequences of cutting corners. Standards were raised, professional engineering organizations strengthened their codes of ethics and their enforcement mechanisms. State licensing boards implemented stricter review processes. The casual phone call approvals that had been common practice became unacceptable. If you changed a design, you produced revised drawings, you ran the calculations, you documented everything. Trade manuals were revised. Technical publications that provided guidance to practicing engineers were updated to include more stringent requirements for design verification and interprofessional communication. The Hyatt Regency walkway collapse became, and remains to this day, a standard case study in engineering programs. First-year students learn about it. Senior capstone courses analyze it. Professional ethics classes dissect it. Generations of engineers have studied the disaster, learned the technical details of the failure, and absorbed the fundamental lesson: check your work, verify everything, never assume. But here's the uncomfortable reality: these lessons came at the cost of 114 lives. The improvements in engineering education, the stricter standards, the enhanced safety culture, all of it emerged not from proactive foresight, but from reactive horror at a preventable disaster. How many other disasters are waiting to happen right now because we haven't yet paid the blood price that seems necessary to force systemic change? How many buildings are standing with hidden flaws that won't be discovered until they fail and kill people? How many industries are operating with inadequate safety standards because there hasn't yet been a disaster dramatic enough to force reform? This is the dark calculus of public safety. We know how to prevent most disasters, we understand the principles, we have the technology, we can implement the standards. But we often don't, because implementing them costs money and time and effort, and until people die in sufficient numbers to generate public outrage and political pressure, the economic calculus favors cutting corners. The Hyatt Regency victims didn't die because we didn't know better. They died because the systems that should have protected them weren't rigorously enforced until their deaths made that enforcement politically and professionally necessary. For years after the disaster, the site remained a painful reminder of loss. The hotel continued to operate. There was no structural damage to the building itself, only to the walkways, but the lobby was fundamentally changed. The collapsed walkways were removed. The space where 114 people had died was cleaned and restored, but it could never feel the same. In 2015, more than 3 decades after the disaster, a memorial was dedicated in Hospital Hill Park, close to the hotel. It's a place for reflection, for remembrance, for the families of victims to come and honor their lost loved ones. The memorial serves as a permanent acknowledgement of the tragedy, ensuring that Kansas City will never forget what happened on July 17, 1981. The hotel itself underwent extensive renovation and was eventually renamed the Sheraton Kansas City at Crown Center. The Hyatt brand had become too associated with the disaster in the minds of locals and visitors. A fresh start seemed necessary. The rebuilt lobby features a single walkway where there had been 3, and crucially, this walkway is supported by pillars rising from the ground floor rather than suspended by hanger rods from above. The elegant floating aesthetic of the original design is gone, replaced by a more conventional but far safer structural system. Nobody wanted to take any chances. Nobody wanted to rely on overhead suspension, no matter how well designed. Thanks to the extensive post-disaster changes and the rigorous safety reviews the building has undergone, the former Hyatt Regency is now described as one of the safest buildings in the country. Every system has been inspected and verified. Every structural element has been analyzed. The building that was the site of America's deadliest structural collapse is now ironically safer than most. The legacy of the Hyatt Regency walkway collapse is complex. It's a legacy of pain and trauma for the victims who died, for the survivors who carry physical and psychological scars, for the families who lost loved ones, for the first responders who witnessed horrors they can never forget, for the entire Kansas City community that was shattered by the disaster. But it's also a legacy of learning. The disaster forced fundamental changes in how engineers are educated, how construction projects are managed, how professional responsibility is understood and enforced. Buildings constructed after the Hyatt Regency collapse, all around the world, are safer because of the lessons learned from those 114 deaths. Does that make the disaster worth it in some cosmic cost-benefit analysis? Absolutely not. Those 114 people should still be alive. Their deaths were preventable and should have been prevented. The improvements in engineering practice and safety standards should have been implemented proactively, based on sound principles and professional diligence, not reactively in response to a mass casualty event. But given that the disaster did happen, given that those lives were lost, the only meaningful response is to ensure that something is learned, that the mistakes are identified, understood, and never repeated. That the deaths, as tragic and unnecessary as they were, at least serve as a cautionary tale that prevents future tragedies. This is what Jack D. Gillam understood when he spent his final years lecturing about his failure. He couldn't undo what had happened, but he could try to ensure that it never happened again. He could use his shame, his guilt, his technical knowledge of exactly what went wrong, to teach others what not to do. And the evidence suggests he succeeded. The Hyatt Regency collapse is seared into the consciousness of the engineering profession. Ask any structural engineer, anywhere in the world, to name a famous engineering disaster, and the Hyatt Regency walkways will be near the top of the list. The technical details of the failure, the single rod versus double rod configuration, the doubling of load at the connection points, are known to engineers across all specialties and experience levels. This widespread knowledge is in its own way a memorial. Every engineer who learns about the Hyatt Regency, who studies the failure, who absorbs the lessons, becomes slightly less likely to make a similar mistake. Every building designed with those lessons in mind is slightly safer. Every verification check performed because an engineer remembered this is how the Hyatt Regency happened potentially prevents another disaster. The 114 people who died on July 17, 1981, didn't choose to become cautionary tales. They went to a tea dance expecting an enjoyable evening and instead became victims of engineering negligence. But their deaths forced changes that have made the world safer. That doesn't justify what happened. It doesn't balance the scales. But it does mean that their deaths weren't entirely meaningless. There's an aspect of this disaster that makes people deeply uncomfortable when they really think about it. The hotel had been open for a full year before the collapse. Those walkways had been used hundreds of times. Thousands of people had walked across them, stood on them, leaned against the railings. The tea dances had been held week after week, with dozens of people gathering on those same walkways every time. For 365 days the flawed design held, it supported loads. It appeared stable. And then on day 366, it didn't. This is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of structural failures, the latency. A building can be unsafe from the moment it's completed, but that unsafety isn't immediately apparent. The structure holds for days, weeks, months, even years. Everything seems fine. And then suddenly, catastrophically, it isn't. How many buildings are standing right now with hidden flaws that haven't manifested yet? How many structures are serving their purposes day after day while slowly accumulating damage that will eventually lead to failure? How many disasters are waiting to happen because the necessary confluence of factors, the specific loading conditions, the accumulated fatigue, the environmental stresses, hasn't quite aligned yet? We can't know. That's the uncomfortable reality of engineering. We design buildings to standards that we believe provide adequate safety margins. We inspect and maintain them to extend their service life. We learn from failures and update our practices. But we can never achieve absolute certainty. There will always be unknowns, always be failure modes we haven't anticipated, always be mistakes that slip through the verification process. The best we can do is maintain rigorous standards, verify thoroughly, communicate clearly, and never become complacent. The Hyatt Regency collapse happened because people became complacent. Because phone call approvals seemed good enough. Because everyone assumed someone else had checked. because the pressure to move quickly overrode the discipline to move carefully. And 114 people paid the price for that complacency. On July 17, 1981, at 7:05 p.m., in the grand lobby of the Hyatt Regency Kansas City, 2 walkways collapsed without warning. In 5 seconds, 114 people died and 216 were injured. It was America's deadliest structural collapse until the September 11 attacks 20 years later. The cause was a simple design change, replacing one continuous hanger rod with 2 shorter rods. A change that seemed innocuous, that made construction easier, that was approved with a phone call. A change that doubled the load on connection points that were already barely adequate. The investigation revealed that a first-year engineering student could have identified the flaw, but multiple companies, multiple professionals, multiple layers of review all failed to catch it. Everyone assumed someone else had checked. Nobody actually did the calculations. The disaster led to sweeping changes in engineering education and practice worldwide. Standards were raised. Curricula were overhauled. The Hyatt Regency became a permanent case study, a cautionary tale taught to every new generation of engineers. But those changes came at the cost of 114 lives, lives that should never have been lost. A disaster that should never have happened. The rebuilt hotel stands today as one of the safest buildings in America. The single walkway that replaced the 3 collapsed ones is supported by solid pillars, engineered and verified to the highest standards. The lobby that was a scene of horror is now a space of beauty again, though those who remember July 17, 1981, can never look at it the same way. The lessons learned on that terrible evening were excruciatingly painful. But they were lessons, at least, that stuck. The walkway collapse remains a sobering reminder of what can happen when communication fails, when assumptions replace verification, when schedule pressure overrides safety concerns. It's a reminder that engineering is not an abstract academic exercise, it's a profession with life and death consequences. And it's a reminder of an uncomfortable truth. We often don't fix problems until people die. We don't implement stricter standards until a disaster makes them politically necessary. We don't prioritize safety over convenience and cost until the blood price has been paid. 114 people died because of one simple design change. A steel fabricator's suggestion to use 2 short hanger rods instead of 1 long continuous rod, a modification proposed purely for construction convenience. Threading long rods would be difficult and time-consuming. Short rods would be easier to manufacture, easier to handle, easier to install. It would make their job simpler. It would save them time and hassle, and it killed 114 people. This change was approved with a phone call. No one calculated whether the connection points could handle the doubled load. No one verified the structural integrity. No one asked whether making installation slightly easier was worth risking human lives. Because nobody checked. Because everyone assumed someone else had done the calculations. This is what happens when human life is valued less than construction convenience. When corporate efficiency and ease of installation are prioritized over basic safety verification. When asking difficult questions is seen as slowing down progress rather than preventing catastrophe. When the inconvenience of threading a long steel rod is considered more important than the lives of the people who will stand beneath it. That is the lesson of the Hyatt Regency walkway collapse. That is what we must never forget. And unfortunately, as long as these patterns of negligence persist, as long as construction schedules can override safety reviews, as long as corporate convenience can trump rigorous verification, as long as human safety is treated as negotiable, there will be more stories like this to tell. More preventable disasters, more lives lost to the same failures, the same assumptions, the same unwillingness to prioritize safety over ease. As long as such irresponsible behavior continues, unfortunately, we will have many more stories to share.